pass the salt, Johnny." Frankie the Hammer Moretti sat at his favorite corner booth at Luigi's in North Chicago. He was the boss of the outfit, a man who controlled every dock and gambling den in the city. Across from him sat his daughter, Bella. She was 10 years old, with curls like her mother and a spirit that couldn't be tamed. Bella reached for the salt, but her hand froze. She pointed at the window. "Dad, why is that man wearing a ski mask in July?" Frankie didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He heard the screech of tires and the heavy clack-clack of a Tommy gun being cocked. "Under the table, Bella, now!" Frankie roared. He grabbed the heavy mahogany table and flipped it over just as the front window turned into a million flying diamonds. Glass rained down like snow. Rat-tat-tat-tat! The wall behind Frankie's head turned into Swiss cheese. The restaurant was filled with screams and the smell of gunpowder. This was it, the first time in 20 years someone had the guts to take a shot at the king of Chicago. Frankie pulled his snub-nosed .38 from his waistband. He wasn't worried about the shooters. He was worried about the exits. The back door was blocked by a delivery truck. They were boxed in. If this story is touching your heart, hit the like button. Share with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The shooters were coming inside. Frankie could hear their heavy boots crunching on the broken glass. "We gotta move, baby girl," Frankie whispered. He grabbed Bella's hand. Her eyes were wide, but she wasn't crying. She was a Moretti. She was tough. They crawled toward the kitchen, staying behind the long marble bar. Frankie popped up and fired 2 shots. One shooter went down, clutching his shoulder. The other dove behind a coat rack. "Keep your head down," Frankie warned, as they burst into the kitchen. The chefs had already fled. The stoves were still on, and a giant pot of tomato sauce was bubbling away. Frankie looked at the industrial walk-in freezer. It was thick steel. It would stop a bullet, but it was a dead end. "In the freezer, Bella. Lock it from the inside, and don't come out until you hear me whistle Bella Ciao. Understand?" "But Dad—" "Go!" He shoved her inside and slammed the heavy door. Now Frankie was alone in a kitchen with 3 professional hitmen closing in. He looked at the deep fryer filled with hot oil and the gas lines running behind the stoves. He didn't have enough bullets, but he had a lot of fire. He unscrewed the gas line and grabbed a dish towel. He was going to turn this kitchen into a bomb. Frankie crouched behind the prep station, his lungs stinging from the smell of leaking gas. He had the dish towel soaked in high-proof brandy from the bar. He just needed a spark. "Come out, Frankie," a voice yelled. "Make it easy on yourself. The girl doesn't have to watch you die." Frankie's blood turned to ice. They knew Bella was here. That changed everything. He wasn't just fighting for his life anymore. He was fighting to keep them from ever reaching that freezer door. One hitman kicked the kitchen door open. Frankie didn't fire his gun. Instead, he grabbed a giant metal basket of frozen fries and slammed it into the vat of boiling oil. Sizzle! A massive cloud of hot steam and grease erupted, blinding the first man. While the hitman screamed and rubbed his eyes, Frankie lunged forward and grabbed the man's shotgun. He kicked him into the stoves and turned toward the second shooter. "Easy does it," Frankie growled, leveling the shotgun. But the third man was smart. He wasn't in the doorway. He was climbing through the drive-through window behind Frankie. Frankie heard the glass crunch and realized he was caught in a crossfire. He had 1 shot left in his pistol and a shotgun he didn't know was loaded. The man at the window fired first. The bullet grazed Frankie's ear, drawing a line of fire across his skin. Frankie rolled under the stainless steel prep table, the blast booming as he pulled the trigger. The blast caught the shooter at the window in the chest, knocking him back out into the alley. But the second man, the one behind the coat rack, was already charging. He tackled Frankie, and they both went crashing into the heavy door of the walk-in freezer. Inside, Frankie could hear Bella let out a tiny gasp. "Don't you touch her!" Frankie roared. He slammed his forehead into the hitman's nose. Crunch! The man staggered back, and Frankie followed up with a heavy right hook that sent the guy sprawling onto the slick, greasy floor. Frankie didn't waste time. He grabbed a heavy meat cleaver from the magnetic strip on the wall. He wasn't a hammer for nothing. He looked at the last hitman, who was shaking his head, trying to clear the cobwebs. "Who sent you?" Frankie demanded, his voice like gravel. "Was it the Genovese family? Was it my own cousin?" The hitman just grinned, showing teeth stained with blood. "Check your phone, Frankie. While you're playing hero in a kitchen, your empire is burning." Frankie heard the distant sound of sirens and explosions coming from the direction of the docks. His heart sank. This wasn't just a hit, it was a war. The sirens were getting louder, but the hitman's grin was the scariest thing in the room. Frankie realized that while he was trapped in Luigi's, the rest of his crew was being picked off one by one across Chicago. Frankie didn't wait for the hitman to finish laughing. He used the butt of the shotgun to knock the man unconscious. He didn't have time for a long interrogation. The smell of gas was getting stronger, and the pilot light on the back stove was flickering. This whole place was a ticking bomb. "Bella, it's me! Whistle!" Frankie shouted. He whistled the first few notes of Bella Ciao. The heavy freezer door creaked open, and Bella stepped out, her face pale but her eyes sharp. She saw the mess, the blood, and her father's wounded ear, but she didn't scream. "We gotta run, Bella. Fast," Frankie said, grabbing a set of keys from the fallen shooter's belt. They burst out the back door just as the kitchen ignited. Boom! The shockwave threw them forward into the gravel of the alley. Frankie shielded Bella with his body as glass and brick rained down. The delivery truck blocking the alley was empty, but the keys Frankie grabbed belonged to a black SUV parked just behind him. He threw Bella into the back seat and jumped into the driver's seat. As he turned the ignition, he saw 2 more cars turning into the alley, blocking their exit. "Hold on tight!" Frankie yelled. He shifted into reverse. He wasn't going to drive around them, he was going to go through them. The SUV roared to life. Frankie slammed on the gas, the tires screaming as they gripped the wet pavement. He rammed the first car, sending it spinning into a row of trash cans. "Dad, they're shooting!" Bella ducked as a bullet shattered the rear window. Frankie swerved onto Michigan Avenue, weaving through the heavy Chicago traffic. The 2 cars were right on his tail. These weren't just street thugs, they were driving like pros. Frankie checked his rear-view mirror and saw a familiar face in the lead car. It was Sal, his own head of security. "Sal, you rat," Frankie growled. He knew he couldn't head to the docks or his main house. Those would be death traps. He needed a place where the Mafia wouldn't dare follow, a place with too many witnesses and too much heat. He headed straight for the heart of the city, toward the crowded tourist spots. "Where are we going, Papa?" Bella asked, clutching her seatbelt. "We're going to the Navy Pier," Frankie said, his eyes narrowing. "If they want me, they're gonna have to take me in front of the whole world." Suddenly, a black helicopter appeared above the skyline, its searchlight cutting through the rain. It wasn't the police. It was marked with the Moretti crest. But Frankie knew he wasn't the one calling the shots anymore. The helicopter's blades whipped the rain into a frenzy, and the searchlight felt like the eye of a giant predator. Frankie gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather groaned. He was being hunted by his own resources, using his own money to fuel the bird in the sky. "Get down on the floorboards, Bella! Don't look up!" Frankie shouted over the roar of the engine. The black SUV skidded around a corner, narrowly missing a yellow taxi. The helicopter stayed pinned on them, the light reflecting off the wet asphalt like a neon target. Frankie knew that on the open road, the chopper had the advantage. He needed cover, and he needed it now. He saw the entrance to the Navy Pier parking garage, a concrete labyrinth. He didn't slow down. He smashed through the wooden security arm, the SUV's suspension bottoming out as he lurched into the shadows of the lower levels. The searchlight vanished, replaced by the rhythmic hum of flickering fluorescent lights. Frankie killed his headlights and drifted into a dark corner behind a massive concrete pillar. "Is the giant bird gone?" Bella whispered from the floor. "For now," Frankie said, checking his pistol. "But Sal knows how I think. He knows I won't stay in a basement. He'll be guarding every exit." Frankie looked at the rows of parked cars. He didn't need a tank, he needed a ghost. He spotted an old beat-up delivery van with a local bakery logo on the side. It was perfect. It was invisible. Frankie hot-wired the bakery van in seconds, the smell of stale bread and flour filling the cabin. He moved Bella into the back, hiding her under a pile of empty crates. "Stay silent, Princess, not a sound," he told her. As he drove slowly toward the exit, he saw Sal standing by the main ramp. Sal was holding a submachine gun, his eyes scanning every luxury car and SUV that tried to leave. He looked like a man who had already stepped into Frankie's shoes. Frankie felt the urge to floor it and run Sal down, but he had Bella to think about. He lowered his head, pulled his cap low, and drove the van right past his former friend. Sal didn't even glance at the rusty bakery truck. Once they were out on the street, Frankie headed for a payphone. He didn't trust his cell. It was a tracking beacon now. He pulled over at a grimy gas station and stepped into the booth, his eyes never leaving the van. He dialed a number he hadn't called in 10 years, the number of the Fixer, a man who lived in the tunnels beneath the city. "It's Moretti," Frankie said when the line picked up. "The king is out in the cold. I need a hole to crawl into, and I need a list of everyone who signed my death warrant." "It's a long list, Frankie," the voice on the other end rasped. "And your cousin Vinny, he's the one holding the pen." The news about Cousin Vinny hit Frankie harder than a punch to the gut. Vinny was family. They had shared Sunday dinners for 30 years. But in the Chicago outfit, blood wasn't thicker than water. It was just another way to track a target. Frankie drove the bakery van toward an abandoned subway entrance near the old Union Station. The rain was turning into a torrential downpour, washing the flour off the windshield. "We're going for a walk, Bella," Frankie said, lifting her out of the crates. He carried her down a set of rusted stairs that looked like they led straight to hell. At the bottom stood the Fixer, a man named Silas who looked like he hadn't seen the sun since the 90s. He was surrounded by flickering computer monitors and old maps of Chicago's underground. "The city is crawling with Vinny's guys, Frankie," Silas said, without looking up. "They've put a $2 million bounty on your head. Even the street gangs are looking for you now." Frankie set Bella down on a cot. "I don't care about the bounty. I want to know how Vinny turned Sal. Sal was my shadow." Silas finally turned around. He slid a grainy photograph across the desk. It showed Sal meeting with a high-ranking FBI agent at a diner in Cicero. "They didn't just buy him, Frankie. They squeezed him. Sal was going..." The news about Cousin Vinny hit Frankie harder than a punch to the gut. Vinny was family. They had shared Sunday dinners for 30 years. But in the Chicago outfit, blood wasn't thicker than water. It was just another way to track a target. Frankie drove the bakery van toward an abandoned subway entrance near the old Union Station. The rain was turning into a torrential downpour, washing the flour off the windshield. "We're going for a walk, Bella," Frankie said, lifting her out of the crates. He carried her down a set of rusted stairs that looked like they led straight to hell. At the bottom stood the Fixer, a man named Silas who looked like he hadn't seen the sun since the 90s. He was surrounded by flickering computer monitors and old maps of Chicago's underground. "The city is crawling with Vinny's guys, Frankie," Silas said, without looking up. They've put a $2 million bounty on your head. Even the street gangs are looking for you now." Frankie set Bella down on a cot. "I don't care about the bounty. I want to know how Vinny turned Sal. Sal was my shadow." Silas finally turned around. He slid a grainy photograph across the desk. It showed Sal meeting with a high-ranking FBI agent at a diner in Cicero. "They didn't just buy him, Frankie. They squeezed him. Sal was going to jail for life unless he gave them a bigger fish. Vinny found out and offered Sal a deal. Kill the boss, and the FBI's evidence disappears." Frankie gripped the edge of the table. He wasn't just being hunted by the mob. He was being hunted by the law, too. "I need guns, Silas. Heavy ones," Frankie growled. "I got a stash in a warehouse by the river," Silas replied, tapping a key. "But you gotta be fast. Vinny's guys are tracing the bakery van's plates as we speak." Frankie didn't hesitate. He took a secret maintenance tunnel that led toward the Chicago River. He kept Bella close, her small hand tucked into his belt. They reached the warehouse, a dark, echoing space filled with crates of illegal spirits and machinery. Frankie found the stash, a pair of chrome .45s and a crate of grenades. But as he reached for a vest, the red laser dots of sniper scopes began dancing on the walls. "Found you, Frankie," a voice boomed from the rafters. It wasn't Sal. It was the Butcher, Vinny's personal enforcer. He was standing on a catwalk holding a high-powered rifle. Below him, a dozen men stepped out from behind the crates, their guns leveled at Frankie and Bella. "Vinny says hello," the Butcher sneered. "He also says thanks for the Empire. It fits him better anyway." Frankie looked at the crates around him. They weren't just filled with alcohol. They were filled with industrial-grade cleaning chemicals, highly flammable. He grabbed a flare from his pocket. "You want the crown, Butcher? Come and get it in the fire." The warehouse felt like a tomb, but Frankie wasn't ready to be buried. The Butcher's men were closing the circle, their heavy boots echoing on the concrete. Bella was tucked behind a steel pillar, her eyes locked on her father. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like she was waiting for the storm to break. "You always did have a flair for the dramatic, Frankie," the Butcher laughed from the catwalk. "But a flare gun against a dozen Uzis? Those aren't great odds, even for the Hammer." Frankie didn't blink. He knew the layout of this warehouse better than his own bedroom. He had stored special shipments here for years. He aimed the flare gun not at the men, but at a stack of pressurized ammonia tanks near the ventilation intake. "Odds don't matter when you're willing to burn it all down," Frankie growled. He pulled the trigger. The bright red phosphorus slammed into the valve of the lead tank. Kaboom! The explosion didn't just create fire. It created a wall of blinding, stinging white gas. The Butcher's men started coughing, their aim going wild as they clutched their throats. Frankie grabbed Bella and pulled a pair of emergency respirators from a wall kit, gear he'd installed years ago for just this kind of accident. "Hold your breath and stay low," he shouted through the mask. He used the smoke as a cloak. In the whiteout, Frankie moved like a predator. He didn't use the guns yet. He used a heavy steel chain, swinging it with enough force to crack skulls. One by one, the men in the mist went down. The Butcher realized his men were being picked off in the fog. He panicked, firing blindly from the catwalk. "Show yourself, you coward!" Frankie appeared directly behind him. He had climbed the service ladder in the back while the smoke rose. The Butcher spun around, swinging his rifle like a club, but Frankie caught it. The two men crashed against the safety railing, 3 stories above the concrete floor. "You betrayed the family for a seat at Vinny's table?" Frankie hissed, his hands tightening around the Butcher's throat. "Vinny offered a future," the Butcher wheezed, reaching for a combat knife in his boot. The blade sliced across Frankie's forearm, but Frankie didn't let go. He saw the red light of the warehouse's secondary alarm flashing. The fire was about to spread to the alcohol crates below. The floor was about to become a lake of blue flame. With a roar of pure rage, Frankie lifted the butcher off his feet and threw him over the railing. The enforcer hit a stack of wooden pallets with a sickening thud. Frankie didn't wait to see if he was breathing. He slid down the fire pole, scooped up Bella, and headed for the loading dock. But as the door rolled up, he saw something that stopped his heart. It wasn't more mobsters. It was a line of black and whites with their lights flashing. The police weren't there to arrest him. They were there to finish what Vinny started. The blue and red lights danced off the smoke, turning the warehouse lot into a nightmare. Frankie stood in the doorway, chest heaving, with Bella tucked behind his leg. He knew every cop in this district, but these weren't the guys he paid off. These were the cleaners, special units that did Vinny's dirty work under the cover of the law. "Drop the weapon, Frankie! Do it now!" a voice boomed over a megaphone. Frankie didn't drop the gun. He looked at the line of squad cars. They were positioned to block the only road out. He knew the drill. If he put his hands up, he'd accidentally get shot while resisting. If he stayed, he'd burn. "Dad, what do we do?" Bella whispered, her voice finally cracking. "We'd take the river," Frankie said. He didn't run for the road. He turned back into the burning warehouse and headed for the loading dock overhanging the Chicago River. There was an old speedboat tied to the pier, used for smuggling medicine during the cold winters. The cops opened fire. Bullets tore through the metal siding of the warehouse like it was paper. Frankie grabbed a heavy fire shield from the wall and used it to cover Bella as they sprinted toward the water. He jumped into the boat and turned the key. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life. He cut the ropes with his meat cleaver just as the first cop burst through the doors. "Keep your head down, Bella," Frankie yelled, slamming the throttle forward. The boat leaped into the dark, choppy water of the river, leaving the burning warehouse and the corrupt cops in a cloud of white foam. The Chicago River was a narrow canyon of concrete and steel. Frankie pushed the boat to its limit, weaving between the heavy barges and bridge pillars. Behind him, 2 police interceptor boats turned on their sirens, their powerful engines closing the gap. "They're faster than us, Papa," Bella shouted over the wind. "Speed isn't everything," Frankie muttered. He knew these waters better than his own name. He looked up and saw the Michigan Avenue Bridge coming up fast. It was a drawbridge, and it was currently down. He grabbed his radio, the one he used to communicate with the bridge operators he had on his payroll for years. "Leo, it's the hammer! Lift the bridge now!" The massive gears of the bridge began to groan and move. The street traffic above stopped, cars honking in confusion. The bridge began to rise, creating a small gap. Frankie timed it perfectly, the boat sliding through just as the gap opened wide enough. But as soon as he cleared the bridge, he saw a police helicopter hovering right in his path, its searchlight blinding him. "Moretti, pull over or we will open fire," the pilot yelled. Frankie didn't pull over. He looked at a stack of fuel barrels on a nearby construction barge. He picked up his chrome .45 and took aim. If he was going down, he was taking the whole river with him. Frankie's finger tightened on the trigger. He wasn't just a mobster anymore. He was a father backed into a corner, and a cornered man in Chicago is a dangerous thing. "Hold on to the seat, Bella. Eyes shut," Frankie roared. He didn't shoot the helicopter. He aimed for the fuel barrels on the construction barge. Bang! Bang! The heavy slugs ripped through the rusted metal. A massive wall of orange flame erupted into the sky, creating a thermal updraft that rocked the police helicopter like a toy. The pilot struggled to keep the bird level as the thick black smoke blinded the searchlight. Frankie used the chaos to cut the engine and drift into the dark shadow of a massive concrete pier. The police boats roared past, their sirens fading into the distance as they chased a ghost. Frankie sat in the silence, the only sound the lapping of the oily river water against the hull. "Is it over, Papa?" Frankie asked, her voice small and trembling. Frankie looked at his reflection in the dark water. He looked like a man who had died and come back. "No, baby. It's only over when we cut the head off the snake. We're gonna find Vinny." He reached into a hidden compartment under the steering wheel and pulled out a satellite phone. It was his emergency-only line. He dialed a number for a safe house in the suburbs, a place even Sal didn't know about. The safe house was a modest ranch-style home in Naperville. To anyone else, it looked like a boring family house. To Frankie, it was a fortress. They arrived at 3 a.m. Frankie checked every window and door before letting Bella out of the car. Inside, the walls were lined with enough firepower to start a small war, and the basement held a server room that could monitor half the city. "You sleep, Bella. I'll be right outside the door," Frankie promised, tucking her into a bed that smelled like lavender, a memory of her mother. As soon as she closed her eyes, Frankie went to the basement. He pulled up the security feeds for his main mansion. He saw Vinny sitting in his chair, drinking his 50-year-old scotch. Vinny was laughing, talking to a man in a dark suit whose face was blurred. He zoomed in on the blurred man's hand. He was wearing a signet ring with a crest Frankie recognized. It belonged to the mayor's office. This wasn't just a mob takeover. The city government was helping Vinny liquidate Frankie so they could build a new stadium on his docks. They weren't just killing a man, they were clearing land. "You want my docks, Vinny?" Frankie whispered to the screen. "I'll give them to you, one piece at a time." Frankie stared at the screen, his face glowing in the blue light of the monitors. He realized that in Chicago, you don't just fight with guns, you fight with dirt. And Frankie had enough dirt to bury the entire city hall. "You think you're a king, Vinny?" Frankie muttered, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "You're just a puppet for a guy in a suit." Frankie opened an encrypted folder labeled The Ledger. It contained every bribe, every secret meeting, and every crooked deal the mayor had ever made with the Moretti family. If Frankie leaked this, the mayor would be in handcuffs by morning, but so would Frankie. "I can't go to jail, Silas," Frankie said into his headset. "Not with Bella out there." "Then don't leak it to the cops." Silas's voice crackled from the safe house speakers. "Leak it to the mayor's opponent. The election is in 2 weeks. Turn the hunter into the hunted." Frankie paused. If he ruined the mayor, Vinny would lose his protection. Without the cleaners on the police force, Vinny was just a guy with a loud mouth and a lot of enemies. Suddenly, the security alarm on the driveway tripped. A black van had pulled up to the ranch house. 2 men in tactical gear stepped out, holding silenced submachine guns. They weren't mobsters. They moved with military precision. If you think Frankie can take out the hitmen, hit the like button. Frankie didn't panic. He had built this house to be a trap. He grabbed a tablet from the desk and swiped his thumb across the screen. "Bella, stay under the bed. Don't move," he yelled through the house intercom. Outside, the 2 hitmen reached the front porch. As they prepared to kick the door, Frankie triggered the welcome mat. The porch floorboards flipped, revealing a high-pressure CO2 blast that knocked the men backward into the bushes. Frankie didn't wait. He grabbed a modified assault rifle from the wall and stepped out onto the balcony. "Wrong house, boys!" He opened fire, the muzzle flashes lighting up the quiet neighborhood. The hitmen dove for cover behind their van, but Frankie was already 1 step ahead. He had preset small explosive charges in the driveway. Click! The driveway exploded in a shower of asphalt and fire. The van flipped over, pinning one of the hitmen underneath. The other tried to run, but Frankie dropped him with a single shot to the leg. Frankie walked down the stairs, his boots crunching on the glass.
He stood over the wounded hitman and pulled off his mask. It wasn't one of Vinny's guys. It was a private security contractor. "Who paid you?" Frankie growled, pressing the hot barrel of the rifle to his chest. The mayor," the man wheezed. "He said you were a loose end." Frankie realized the war had just gone up a level. It wasn't about the docks anymore. It was about survival.
The realization hit Frankie like a freight train. The mayor wasn't just a partner. He was the one holding the leash. Vinny was just the dog. If Frankie wanted to end this, he had to stop playing by the rules of the street and start playing by the rules of the city. "Pack your bags, Bella. We're going to a party," Frankie said, his voice cold as the Chicago winter. He didn't mean a birthday party. That night was the Emerald Ball, a massive charity event at the Blackstone Hotel. Every billionaire, judge, and crooked politician in Chicago would be there, including the mayor and Vinny. Frankie didn't go through the front door. He used the service elevators, dressed in a waiter's tuxedo he'd taken from a contact. Bella was tucked away in a high-tech surveillance van parked 2 blocks away, guarded by Silas. She was wearing a headset, acting as Frankie's eyes on the security cameras. "Target spotted, Papa," Bella's voice chirped in his ear. "The mayor is in the VIP lounge on the 4th floor. Vinny is with him. They have 6 guards." Frankie adjusted his bow tie. Hidden inside his serving tray wasn't champagne. It was a silenced pistol and a flash drive containing the evidence of their crimes. He moved through the crowd of elite socialites, a ghost in a sea of silk and diamonds. As he reached the lounge door, a guard held up a hand. "Waiters aren't allowed in here tonight." "The mayor requested the 1945 reserve," Frankie said, tilting the tray just enough so the guard could see the expensive label and the barrel of the .38 hidden behind it. The guard's eyes went wide, but before he could reach for his radio, Frankie slammed the heavy silver tray into his temple. The man crumpled. Frankie stepped into the lounge and locked the door behind him. The mayor and Vinny were clinking glasses near the fireplace. They both froze when they saw the waiter. "Frankie?" Vinny gasped, dropping his glass. The crystal shattered on the rug. "How are you even alive?" "I'm a hard habit to break, Vinny," Frankie said, stepping into the light. The mayor tried to reach for a panic button under the table, but Frankie fired a single shot into the wood, inches from the man's fingers. "Don't. I've already sent the ledger to every news station in the state. The only reason the police aren't here yet is because I wanted to look you in the eyes first." Vinny lunged for a gun on the mantel, but Frankie was faster. He tackled his cousin, and they crashed into the glass coffee table. This wasn't a professional hit anymore. It was a brawl between 2 men who grew up in the same house. "You killed our legacy for a stadium," Frankie roared, pinning Vinny down. "You built a future," Vinny screamed back. "You were stuck in the past, Frankie. People like us don't survive anymore." Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered and died. A red emergency light began to pulse. From the hallway, the sound of heavy boots and gas canisters being deployed echoed through the vents. The mayor's secret cleaners had arrived, and they didn't care who was in the room. They had orders to kill everyone to protect the secret. The room was bathed in a rhythmic, bloody red light. Smoke began to hiss through the vents. Tear gas. Frankie's eyes burned, but his grip on Vinny didn't loosen. He looked at the man he once called brother, then at the mayor, who was cowering under a desk like a rat. "They're here to kill us all, Vinny," Frankie coughed, the gas filling his lungs. "The mayor doesn't want witnesses, not me and definitely not you." Vinny's eyes went wide as the first bullet shattered the mahogany door. The cleaners weren't knocking. They were using submachine guns to turn the entrance into a sieve. "I have a key to the service hatch," Vinny gasped,
reaching into his pocket. "But I can't reach it with you on top of me." Frankie had a split second to decide. He let go. Then he scrambled to a small brass panel in the floor. He punched in a code and a narrow trap door popped open. It led to the laundry chutes. "Get in!" Vinny yelled. The mayor tried to scramble toward them, but Frankie blocked him. "Not you. You stay here and answer to the city." Frankie grabbed the flash drive from the table, the one containing all the proof, and shoved it into the mayor's pocket. "When they find you, tell them the hammer says hello." Frankie and Vinny dived into the dark chute just as the doors blew off their hinges. They slid 3 stories down, landing in a mountain of dirty hotel linens. The basement of the Blackstone Hotel was a maze of steam pipes and giant washing machines. Frankie and Vinny emerged from the laundry pile, covered in dust and sweat. "Why did you save me?" Vinny asked, checking his bruised ribs. "Because Ma would kill me if I didn't," growled Frankie. "Now give me your gun. We're going to get my daughter." They moved through the boiler room, the heat making the air shimmer. But as they reached the underground garage where Silas was supposed to be waiting with Bella, the silence was too loud. The surveillance van was there, but the back door was hanging open. Silas was slumped over the steering wheel, unconscious. Bella was gone. A single black glove was left on the pavement. Inside the glove was a cell phone. It started to ring. Frankie picked it up. "If you touched her—" "Quiet, Frankie." Sal's voice came through the line. Sal, the head of security who had betrayed him first. "The mayor is done, and Vinny is a ghost, but I still want my payday. Meet me at the Adler Planetarium in 20 minutes. Bring the ledger. Just you, or the girl goes into the lake." Frankie looked at Vinny. For the first time in years, the 2 cousins looked at each other with the same look they had as kids before a street fight. "We're going to the lake," Frankie said. The skyline of Chicago looked like a row of jagged teeth against the moon. Frankie and Vinny were in a stolen sedan, flying toward the lakefront. The silence between them was heavy, but they didn't need words. They were going to war. The Adler Planetarium sat on the edge of the lake, surrounded by cold water and open concrete. There was nowhere to hide. As Frankie pulled up, he saw Sal standing under the giant telescope dome. He was holding Bella's hand. "Stay in the car until I signal," Frankie whispered to Vinny. "If this goes sideways, you take the shot." Frankie stepped out, his hands held high. The wind off Lake Michigan felt like ice needles on his skin. "I have the ledger, Sal! Let her go!" Frankie shouted. Sal laughed, a hollow sound that was lost in the wind. "You think I want that dusty book? The mayor is finished, Frankie. I want the codes to your offshore accounts. $300 million. That's the price for the girl." Behind Sal, 3 snipers appeared on the roof of the planetarium. The red dots of their lasers began to dance across Frankie's chest. "I don't have the codes here," Frankie lied, stepping closer. "They're in a safety deposit box. You need my thumbprint." He was only 10 feet away now. He could see the fear in Bella's eyes, but he also saw something else, the small pocket knife he had taught her to hide in her boot. "Don't lie to me, Frankie," Sal screamed, his face twisting. "I know how you work. Give me the codes or she swims." Sal moved to grab Bella, but he made a mistake. He looked up at the snipers for a split second. "Stab!" Bella didn't scream. She leaned down, pulled the knife from her boot, and drove it into Sal's calf. Sal roared in pain and let go of her hand. "Now, Vinny!" Frankie yelled. Vinny burst from the car, an assault rifle spitting fire. He didn't aim for Sal. He aimed for the snipers on the roof, suppressing their fire so Frankie could move. Frankie lunged forward, tackling Sal just as a bullet grazed his shoulder. The 2 men rolled across the concrete. Sal was younger and faster, but Frankie was fueled by 20 years of rage. He pinned Sal's arm behind his back and pressed his face into the cold stone. "You broke the code, Sal," he hissed. "You touched the family." Suddenly, a loud clack-clack echoed behind them. Frankie turned to see Vinny standing there, his rifle lowered. But Vinny wasn't looking at the snipers. He was looking at the black SUV pulling up behind them. The door opened, and a man stepped out. He was wearing a high-end charcoal suit and a ring Frankie hadn't seen in years. It was the Don of the New York families. "Enough," the Don said. "Frankie, you've caused quite a mess in my city." The wind off the lake died down, leaving a chilling silence. The Don from New York stood there, flanked by men who looked more like soldiers than mobsters. Frankie stood over a bleeding Sal, while Vinny stood between them and Bella. The fate of Chicago was hanging by a thread. "New York doesn't have a vote in Chicago," Frankie said, his voice steady despite the blood dripping from his shoulder. The Don smiled thinly. "We do when the Chicago boss starts blowing up his own warehouses and leaking ledgers to the press. You're bad for business, Frankie. But Vinny here, Vinny told me he could fix it. He said if I helped him, he'd give New York a 40% cut of the docks." Frankie looked at Vinny. His cousin wouldn't meet his eyes. The team move back at the hotel was just a play to get Frankie into the open. "Is that true, Vin?" Frankie asked quietly. Vinny gripped his rifle tighter. "I had to, Frankie. You were gonna burn it all. I'm saving the family business." "No," Frankie said, stepping toward Bella and pulling her behind him. "You're selling the family soul." Suddenly, the sound of 100 sirens filled the air, but they weren't coming from the city. They were coming from the lake. Police boats and Coast Guard cutters emerged from the mist, their searchlights blinding everyone on the plaza. "The ledger wasn't just sent to the news, Vinny," Frankie shouted over the sirens. "I sent it to the Attorney General. The feds are here for all of us, New York, Chicago, and the mayor." The Don's face went pale. He didn't want a war with the FBI. He scrambled back into his SUV, his men following close behind. "This isn't over, Moretti." In the chaos, Sal tried to crawl away, but the police were already swarming the plaza. Frankie looked at Vinny. He could see the handcuffs in his cousin's future. "Go, Vinny. Take the boat under the pier. It's your only shot." "Why?" Vinny stuttered. "Because I'm a boss, and a boss takes care of his family, even the ones who stabbed you in the back." Vinny vanished into the shadows just as the first federal agents reached the plaza. Frankie knelt down and hugged Bella. He wasn't the hammer anymore. He was just a dad. "It's over, Bella. We're going home." "But Papa," she whispered, looking at the handcuffs an agent was holding. "What about you?" Frankie smiled, holding up a small encrypted black box he'd taken from Sal's pocket. "I've got enough secrets in this box to make sure we never have to run again." Thank you for watching. I would like to get engaged with you. Kindly tell us, who was your favorite character? Type Frankie, Bella, or Vinny in the comments. Subscribe for more epic Mafia stories every week. Share this video if you think family is everything.